What I'd like to talk about today for the adult portion of the teaching, again, is similar. The subject is one of those universal subjects that applies to sentient beings of all ages and all types, and not only the human variety either. Because one thing that all sentient beings have in common is that we suffer from desire. Now, often that particular teaching is misunderstood and it's misapplied. We think that in order to apply some insight regarding that particular teaching, that all sentient beings suffer from desire, that the way to live is a very superficial representation of doing without such desire. And that is to say, we adapt a certain demeanor that ultimately, if it's not applied in a deep and profound way, actually makes us feel superior, makes us feel holy, but it doesn't do us much good. We really have to understand the nature of desire much more deeply than we do. And the problem with understanding the nature of desire is that it's very hard to do. We can literally be involved in Dharma teaching for a very long time. We can be in the presence of the teaching, we can hear the teaching, and we cannot apply it at all. It can just go right over our heads. And I think that is most often the case with practitioners, especially new ones. How does desire come about, and how is it so all-pervasive? Well, the teaching that we are given by the Buddha indicates that our nature is the pristine, primordial wisdom nature, that nature which is free of contrivance, which is innately wakeful and luminous, that nature which is the combination of awareness and space, pure and uncontrived. This is the Buddha nature, and this is our nature. But somewhere along the line, and according to the Buddha's teaching, this happened a very long time ago, we assumed the identity or the idea of self. We assumed the concept of self-nature. The mind became, at that point, somehow divided, because in order to assume the identity of self-nature, in order to cling to the idea of ego or self-nature, one has to distinguish between self and other. That is the way in which such an idea is formulated. So from the very first moment of the inception of that idea of self-nature, of that assumption of self-nature, from that very moment, the mind became divided in such a way as to distinguish between self and other. Without the distinguishing between self and other, there is no way to conceptualize self. So that process has been going on for some time. The distinction between self and other constantly requires definition. That is to say, we must define the place at which self ceases and other finally begins. That distinction must be constantly defined, constantly focused on, so that in fact the consciousness of the mind becomes very tight, very contrived. Once that distinguishing line, if you will, is focused on, then one has to constantly reevaluate one's idea structure. That is to say, self must be constantly evaluated. If it is something distinct from other, and the idea has come to the point where its parameters have been discovered, if you will, or I shouldn't say discovered because that implies that they are real, and they are not. The parameters are settled upon, they are decided upon. Then at that point, this process of the evaluation of self constantly has to continue. And there is the birth then of a kind of elaboration at that point, in which it isn't only the simple idea of some distinction between self and other. but the qualities of self, the size of self, the smell of self, the method of self, the appearance of self, the truth of self, all of these issues have to be elaborated upon continually. And that process of elaboration is very, very complicated. Very complicated. And it becomes a process in which we become totally fixated. Our consciousness becomes then not the non-specific, luminous, natural, wakeful state that is the true nature, but it becomes a consciousness that views specific phenomena as being distinct from self, and specifically it views self in a very specific way. So the view, the perception, the consciousness becomes very tight and very contrived. Due to the process of elaboration, we actually develop the continual tendency to not only distinguish between self and other, but to evaluate, as I've just described. And in that way, we automatically develop the habit of having either attraction or repulsion or neutrality toward all phenomena. There is not one piece of phenomena that we do not view with attraction or repulsion or neutrality. But the neutrality must be understood not as a peaceful, calm abiding, as would occur in the natural state. That neutrality is kind of like a bounce between attraction and repulsion, and one remains kind of balanced in that way, a neutral, kind of like this, you see? And that neutrality, however, is still specific. It is still taking into account both attraction and repulsion. And that process continues. The mind becomes very much involved in that, totally involved in that. The Buddha teaches us that this has taken place since time out of mind, inconceivable time. That we have in fact lived many, many lifetimes. And what has occurred during all of that time are very profound habitual tendencies, strongly, deeply ingrained habitual tendencies. Among those tendencies, of course, are desire. The tendencies, the habitual tendencies that we develop are many. We develop the habit of perception just as we have established it, by viewing self as distinct from other. That becomes not only a natural tendency, but it becomes such a strongly, deeply ingrained habit, not only at that very simple level, but at a much more profound, more elaborate level, that the process of conceptualization surrounding those simple ideas becomes extremely deeply ingrained, extremely habitual. One has what we would call a compulsion concerning such perceptions. Accordingly, the Buddha teaches us that we never, in the state that we are in now, as sentient beings, ever have a natural, true, relaxed perception of the primordial wisdom nature. We have no taste of the nature, but instead we are deeply involved in the habit of self-perception, of the perception of other, and all of the elaborations and configurations that go with that. They are deeply ingrained. These deeply ingrained habits, lifetime after lifetime and life after lifetime, become more deeply ingrained than we can possibly imagine. Have any of you ever been addicted in any way to anything in cyclic existence, such as cigarettes, or alcohol, or difficult relationships? The women in the room go, difficult relationships. Certain personality habits. Have any of you become addicted to anything like that? Of course, we have all become addicted to something, sometime, something that is part of cyclic existence. Try to imagine that that particular addiction is only an addiction that has really taken form in the way that it is during the course of one lifetime, and you haven't even finished that lifetime yet. Many of you in this room are under the age of 65. So you haven't really had time to make a serious habit. You haven't had time to have a serious compulsion. You don't even know what addiction is yet. Because according to the Buddha, we have been involved in the process of compulsion and addiction and habitual tendency not for one lifetime, but for lifetimes of an inconceivable length that stretch across an inconceivable length of time. Time out of mind, inconceivable time. For that long we have been developing and polishing and loving and treasuring our habitual tendencies, our addictions. We're really good at this. And then, like I was telling the children, when you have a strong desire, a strong compulsion to have something, a strong grasping or neediness, what we usually do is try to satisfy it. Try to satisfy it. And we say, oh, darn, I have desire. Better go satisfy it now. And of course, what does the satisfying it do? The satisfying it only increases the habit. It only makes it worse. The inflammation that we experience within our minds only becomes more profound. You cannot satisfy desire. You cannot. It will only get worse. Not only that, but you will drag into it other people with whom you try to satisfy that desire. Anyone else that you involve, should it be that kind of desire. It only increases and it never gets better that way. Now, the Buddha teaches us that there are ways to satisfy desire, but the problem is that nobody really wants to hear about that. Nobody really wants to get the big picture about this. The good news is there is a cure. The bad news is you're not going to like it. But you see, the problem is you don't like the disease either, because you're suffering. You really are suffering. And every time you get what you want, it either rusts, decays, goes bad, becomes frigid, whatever it is. It goes away. It never quite works for you, not for any length of time. You know, I was talking to my root guru last night. I was talking to Jalta Rinpoche, and he was telling me of the faults of desire because we were talking about one of my students who's having a terrible problem with that. And he said, you know, the difficulty is like this. The difficulty is that the lie, the trick of cyclic existence is that it is possible, you see, to satisfy that desire for a short period of time. You can feel, for instance, in a sexual relationship, a kind of bliss, can't you? Short period of time, 5 minutes maybe, right before someone belches or something. 5 minutes, whatever it is. Well, you know, if you think about how long life is, it's a very, very short period of time in which you can satisfy yourself. You can feel a kind of bliss. You can feel a kind of, oh, this is it. This is what I've been waiting for. I've been needing this. I've been needing this. I've been needing this. And then you get it. And then it's gone. And he said, maybe you can make yourself happy for a few years. Maybe you can be happy for most of your lifetime. But the problem is, the length of life is like water rushing down a mountain. You know, you look at water rushing down a mountain, it seems like it's been rushing down a mountain for millions of years. Seems like it's been there for thousands of years. How long has that water been rushing down the mountain? Long enough to make a big imprint in the mountain. Must be a long time that water's been rushing down the mountain. But if you understand that if you could follow 1 cup of water as it goes down the mountain, psh, it's gone. It's moving so fast you can't even see it. Our lives are like that. We experience continuum in a strange, diluted way, but in fact, if you've reached 40 yet, you know that this thing is happening remarkably fast. Haven't you noticed that? When I reached 40, I looked at it and I said, holy cow, I thought I was still a kid. I thought I was still growing up. What happened here? How can this be? How can it be that I'm not finished growing up yet and you got these things coming in here? How can that possibly be happening? But it is, it's like that. The trick of cyclic existence is that it's like a narcotic. It makes you think that you can control it, you know? It makes you think that you can have what you want. Take the red pill, get the red solution. That's how we feel in cyclic existence. But it really is literally like a cup of water going down a mountain. It's gone. And then what you are left with is the habitual tendencies that you have cultivated during the course of your life. They will come to you in the next lifetime. And if you have been filled with desire and have only sought to solve your desire without thinking of the welfare of sentient beings, without thinking of any kind of realistic perception of what's happening to you, then in your next lifetime you will experience exactly the same thing. Worse. Much worse. And so Rinpoche was saying that that isn't the answer. That can never be the answer. It can never be the answer to try to satisfy one's desire in that way. To cling to desire, to hold on to it, to think that that's what's happening, to think that all it's about is getting what you want and making yourself feel good. Do you know why you lust for that? Do you know why you want that? Do you know why you feel that craving? You feel that craving because you felt it before and before and before and again and again and again. And you have always thought only about yourself, and you have tried to satisfy it in that way, and you have developed the habitual tendency that is equal to that of an addict on dope. It's like that. And according to the Buddha's teaching, that is not the answer. It will never help, and you will never be free that way. One time I taught at an Alcoholics Anonymous workshop, and I really liked that because it was amazing to me how much like their system Buddhism really is. It's right down the line. It's the same thing. In AA they tell you, you have got to stop. There's no talking to, and you can't sit there with a bottle of liquor in your hand and talk to the thing, reason with it. You can't bluff your way through a bottle of liquor. You can't do that. You can't bluff on this. You either do it or you don't do it. And it's like that with the Buddha Dharma. The Buddha Dharma teaches us that we either practice renunciation, either in an outward way where we take the robes, or in an inward way in our hearts as lay people. But whatever it is, you cannot be doped by cyclic existence. You cannot take it into you as a real and viable solution. According to the Buddha's teaching, there is only one way to achieve happiness and relaxation of the mind, that relaxation that brings joy, and that is to practice in order to achieve enlightenment. We are really afflicted. You know, from time to time I have had actual alcoholics and ex-drug users come to me and they say, I want to be a student here, but you don't know where I've been. You don't know. You just don't know. And I have to tell you, I just sort of roll my eyes. Oh. Because we are all addicts. We are all addicts. We are all addicted to cyclic existence. We are all in an uncontrollable, inflammatory frenzy. And the reason why we can't see our way through that is that we're still taking it in. We got our mouths open, we're eating it right and left. We are sucking it down. And so long as we are sucking it down, we are never going to be able to see that moment of sobriety called the precious awakened state. The natural state in which the mind is just as it is. The cure is very difficult. The cure means stop. You just stop. Just stop. Nobody wants to hear that, though, do they? Rinpoche was saying that we're kind of spoiled. Kind of spoiled. I had to roll my eyes when he said that because I know that he's meaning, you are spoiled rotten. We're spoiled because we think we can have it all. We think we can practice a little Buddhism here and call ourselves Buddhists. We think we can feel holy and spiritual. We think we can convince ourselves that we're practicing the spiritual life. And then we think we can have everything we want all at the same time. And he said also the problem is that pretty much here in America, sky's the limit. You can get what you want, you know? Or at least you can convince yourself that you want what you're getting. Whatever. I'm not sure which it is. Maybe it's the latter. What do you think? Have you ever been in a relationship where you convinced yourself that you wanted what you were getting? All the people that have been married for a while go, I don't mean it like that. You understand. But in truth, there is only one real happiness, and that happiness comes with the very cessation of desire. We have to be able to look truthfully at cause and effect relationships. That is the one aspect of spiritual practice that students do not wish to view. They don't wish to see it. We want to go into a wonderful, moving, heart-wrenching discourse, you know, as to how I wish to be spiritual. And how, in fact, I am living a spiritual life. I read spiritual books. And I think about spiritual things. No, I do. No, really, I do. I think about spiritual things. Can't you see? My eyes are rolled ever skyward. So I think about spiritual things, and I'm extremely holy. And I live a spiritual life, and I talk softly and very genteelly. And so these are the ways in which we think we are practicing spirituality. And those are fun, actually. Those are fun because they give us an identity. We get to feel like a big shot. We have a label. We can feel comfortable. We can say, I am a really good person. We can pat ourselves on the back, and we can invite other people to do that also, you know, by telling them how great we are. One of my sons, who likes to talk about himself a lot, has a great line. He says, now enough about me. Let's talk about you. How do you feel about me? We do that, don't we? I mean, about being spiritual. So, anyway, can any of you recognize which son that might be? Probably a little family joke there. He'll kill me for this. But at any rate, the tendency is clear for us to want to do the schmoozy part of religious practice. We want to do the fun part. The hard part is really looking at cause and effect relationships. Now, the Buddha gives us some horrible cause and effect relationships in a list. Some of them are, for instance, those that are able to keep spiritual commitments on a mental, verbal, and physical level. That is to say, practice with body, speech, and mind. In the future will be born beautiful. Beautiful to look at. You know, very attractive, very beautiful, and with a great deal of charisma. Those that make such vows and break them will be born not only unattractive, but often with some kind of deformity, some kind of physical problem. Now, take that as a perfect example. That's a perfect example. Often the people that are very, very beautiful wish, you know, they sort of have that response from other people in society where other people look at them and say, you are really beautiful. You know, you're really beautiful. So beautiful that I really like to look at you. And so the people that are beautiful go, oh, they like to look at me. So look at me now. And they sort of bounce around with that a little bit, you know. And they learn to live that way. And they feel that they can get by on beauty so they don't have to have any ethics. Maybe they don't have to have any morality. Maybe they don't have to have much personality. Maybe they don't have to be good at too many things. They're sort of like decorator pieces, you know. And there are people that live that way. I don't personally know any, Certainly I'm not one of them, but there are people that live that way. They get by on that. What they are doing actually is absolutely ensuring that in a future life they will not have that beauty, not for a long time. They're kissing it goodbye, out the window. They must have done something in the past that was right. They must have kept some vow. They must have kept some commitment. They must have lived purely in some way to make their body a beautiful vessel. But they're turning it around. They're losing it. They're losing it. Then there are those people that are not so attractive. Those people that are not so attractive, or for some reason believe that they are not so attractive, wish to make themselves attractive. They wish to get approval from others. They wish to get love from others. They wish to get something from others that tells them that they're okay, makes them feel adequate, makes them feel good. What they don't know is that in their fearfulness, they are creating for themselves the perpetuation of their condition. What if instead they said, I am only one person. How I look, that's not so important. Whether I feel myself to be really adequate, okay, but it's not a big deal. Let me spend the rest of my life making prayers that those who are in misery, who feel ugly, who feel unadorned, that they would be adorned in splendor in this and every future lifetime. Let me make prayers for that. Let me make wishing prayers for them as though their welfare were much more important than mine. Let me live purely according to that kind of compassionate idea. Let me establish myself in that kind of bodhicitta, awakened compassion. Let me think only about that. Believe me, in some future life, probably the next future life, but who can say for sure, that person will be beautiful, beautiful in every way. And interestingly, that person, although they may not be physically beautiful in this lifetime, will be beautiful to others in ways that the physically beautiful person could never have been. But they will actually create the karma of physical beauty. Now, of course, that's not such a great payoff. You think about that. I mean, physical beauty is a wonderful thing, but it's not really such a great payoff. It's not something to really go for in any way, because if you use up all your karma all your merit being physically beautiful in one lifetime, so what, right? It's not that great of a deal. But you know, you can't really say that to those people who have never really been loved because they're so unattractive, or who have some kind of physical deformity that they've lived with their whole lives. They don't believe you. They can't hear it. They don't know. But we have the teaching of cause and effect. Are we going to waste that teaching? We've been learning how to live. We are beginning to develop some kind of understanding. Rinpoche was saying last night, if we practice that understanding and live accordingly, everything's got to come up well, because it's like planting a good seed. If you plant a pure and virtuous seed, the results of it have to be good. How can they be bad? How can they be bad? It isn't logical. An apple seed will always produce an apple. But on the other hand, if we, knowing these cause and effect relationships, then abandon them and break vows and practice non-virtue, practice selfishness and think only of ourselves and what we need, how can we get what we want? How can I get it? I want it, I want it, I want it. If that's all we think about, then we are literally lying down with the enemy. The enemy that will kill us, the enemy that will destroy us, the enemy that will rip us apart piece by piece. We are lying down with the enemy, we are feeding the enemy, we are allowing the enemy to do with us whatever it will. Our only true friend is our practice. What we carry in our heart, the virtue that we carry in our heart, It's our only true practice, and it's all that we can ever offer to another. Are we doing anyone a big favor by cultivating such strong dependency with them? Yeah, we're helping them to go down just like us. The Buddha teaches us that there is an antidote to desire. And that antidote must be practiced firmly and purely in the heart. And it is called renunciation. Now, on the Buddhist path, speaking specifically of the Buddhist path, there are many different ways that one can practice this. One can practice it as a lay person, walking around looking like a lay person and living as a lay person does, but practice it genuinely and truly in the heart. Or one can practice it as a monk or a nun. Most people, in fact, all of the people here who have chosen to practice as a monk or a nun really need to do so. They have been honest with themselves. They have seen themselves, and they know that the only way to quit is cold turkey. There's no other compromise, You can't give yourself half a bottle of liquor and think that that's making you a better person. Now, for other people, they are able to practice in their heart. But that is a more difficult practice, actually. And there are many lay people that I see that I feel should take robes. So everybody's wondering, who's she looking at now? Let me scan the room generally. Make you all scared. Of course, the choice is yours. I myself have a family and I practice as a lay person. It's tough. There's a lot to be confused about in cyclic existence. But the thing that has to be accomplished, the thing that must be accomplished immediately and firmly and truly, is that one must understand the faults of cyclic existence. One must understand the condition of cyclic existence, and particularly one must understand cause and effect. How many times in one lifetime do you intend to betray yourself before you help yourself? How many times, like a spoiled, drunken child, are you just going to say, I think I'll just have a little more? How many times are you going to do that before you wake up and you realize that your desire is so much bigger than all of the good qualities you have piled together? And then what are you going to do? If your desire is that great, are you helpless? According to the Buddha, no, you are not. First thing you do is take refuge. Next thing you do is think about others and practice in order to benefit others and make prayers for others and begin to cultivate that kind of compassion. And the next thing you do is to begin to practice in whatever way you can, small. It'll be small at first. Maybe small. First of all, you examine cause and effect. Next, you begin to act on it. Well, gee, if I continue with this non-virtuous, selfish way, I'm not only going to hurt myself, but I'm going to hurt the person who I'm practicing this non-virtue with. So I better stop thinking only about myself. I better practice cause and effect. In closing, the Buddha has actually two kinds of wisdom. We think of the Buddha as someone who sits under a tree and la-di-da, he practices emptiness and he can go into samadhi. Very holy stuff, Sits there in a lotus position, ankles all bent up. Practices samadhi, looking just as holy as you can just ever think about. And that's Buddhism. That's baloney is what that is. That has nothing to do with anything. The Buddha has two kinds of wisdom. Yes, the Buddha lives in samadhi. The Buddha knows samadhi. In his enlightenment, he absolutely has the accumulation of wisdom. That is to say, the understanding of the profound nature, the understanding of emptiness. He is awake to the primordial wisdom nature. So yeah, there is that. The Buddha does practice samadhi. But the Buddha has the other, equally as important, accumulation. And that is the accumulation of knowledge. And that knowledge specifically applies to the knowledge of cause and effect relationships. The Buddha is not a drooling idiot that can't catch a cab on his own. The Buddha, if he lived in this time, would be not only able to catch cabs, but would be able to tell you where that cab has been, where it's going, and every single piece of karma, cause and effect relationship that brought that cab driver to be the ugly son of a gun that he is today. That's what the Buddha could do. He knows every bit of cause and effect. He is absolutely competent in understanding the faults of cyclic existence, and therefore being able to teach others to alleviate their own suffering by extracting themselves from cyclic existence through the pacification of desire. This is what the Buddha knows. There is a definite competence that one has to adapt. It has to be an intelligent, thoughtful, deepened, commonsensical, eyes open, head up kind of competence that is a true spiritual awakening. It is half of what you need. When you begin to apply the teachings associated with the full knowledge of cause and effect relationships and how they interdependently arise, and when you begin to apply the antidote in a sensible way, then at that point you will have the result of enlightenment, because, hey, there's no, if you think about it, the Buddha nature is not something that you have to be real smart to make up. The Buddha nature is not something that you build because no one else has it and only you do. The Buddha nature isn't something that you can order by mail and pay lots of money for. The Buddha nature is simply the natural state. When you quit having the desire, that is the nature. The mind relaxes. Conceptual proliferation begins to abate. And naturally one becomes awakened to the purely wakeful state. Of course, it's not that simple. You not only pacify desire, but you practice in such a way as to antidote all of the habitual tendencies that you have been involved in since time out of mind. But like sobriety, there's only one way to get it. And that's to stop being an addict. Or at least, if you can't stop being an addict, and it is natural for all sentient beings to be addicts, then at least stop taking the drug of delusion. So heads up, open your eyes, get the big picture. You can't solve the problem by continuing it. The problem is solved by practicing renunciation, by stopping. For once, don't betray yourself. For once, do yourself a favor. For once, give yourself a break. And for goodness sake, try to understand that every time you become more and more lost in cyclic existence, you encourage to others to do the same. Nobody's in cyclic existence alone. We cannot practice desire all by ourselves. We are doing it in concert, together, in community. So for goodness sake, think about others as well. Live a spiritual life, but live it in such a way that you practice from the heart. With your eyes open, intelligently, apply the antidote.